Statistically speaking, the Wild West wasn't quite as wild as pop culture would have us believe, but it wasn't exactly cozy living either. Sure, gunfights and rattlesnakes made life risky, but what most people forget is that the real danger often came from your very own house. Imagine living in a wooden cabin where the floor could collapse beneath you into a pit of fire, where the porch might explode if you tugged the wrong beam, or where even the family Bible could double as a bulletproof shield. The West was a land of ingenuity born out of paranoia, and sometimes that creativity went from clever to downright insane. And while you and I might like to think we'd survive out there, toughing it out with grit and cowboy swagger, the truth is you probably wouldn't make it past the first week. These homes weren't just shelters. They were booby-trapped fortresses designed to defend against raiders, outlaws, and anything else that wandered too close. One wrong move inside your own living room, and it could be game over. But before we dive into collapsing roofs, weaponized, wells and outhouses packed with rifles, be sure to subscribe to the Sleepy Historian tonight. That way you won't miss any of the strange forgotten realities of frontier life we bring to light every week. And hey, drop a comment down below. Tell us what other parts of Wild West life you'd like us to dig up, whether it's cowboy, diets, dangerous jobs, or the bizarre laws towns used to keep the peace. All right, partners, saddle up. Tonight, we're stepping inside the most dangerous houses in American history. And trust me, after hearing about these 30 deadly home features, you'll never look at your front porch the same way again. On the root cellar panic room on the frontier, what looked like a humble root cellar was often far more than a place to store potatoes. Families built them as underground bunkers, reinforced with stone walls several feet thick. Hidden vents disguised, as drain pipes let fresh air in, and rifle ports drilled into the walls let families fire from safety. Children were taught from the age of 5. When danger came, don't cry, don't hesitate, just run to the cellar. The Hendersons of Abilene had one beneath a fake woodpile, large enough for 7 people to hide for 3 days. In the quiet darkness, families would wait as raiders tore apart their homes above. The moment they heard footsteps directly overhead, rifles would poke out of tiny holes in the ceiling. It was survival stripped to its most brutal logic. The house might burn, but the people inside would live to rebuild. 2. The outhouse arsenal. Most people think of outhouses as the least glamorous part of frontier life. But in the Wild West, even the toilet doubled as a fortress. Ranchers drilled tiny gun ports disguised as ventilation holes into the walls, giving anyone inside a clear field of fire. Charlie Morrison of Dodge City kept a Winchester rifle, 2 Colts, and 50 rounds hidden under his privy floorboards. His reasoning was simple. If I'm dying with my pants down, I'm taking some of them with me. The outhouse was usually the farthest building from the main house, making it the perfect spot for both observation and surprise defense. Outlaws almost never searched the privy. It stank too much in the July heat. That smell, in a grim way, was part of its defense. The very place no one wanted to go became the last place a bandit expected to meet a bullet. 3. The Indian trading window on the side of many frontier cabins was a strange window, smaller and reinforced with iron bars. It wasn't for ventilation or decoration. It was for survival. Families traded with Native Americans through these. Indian windows, sliding flour, coffee, or tobacco out, and receiving furs, jewelry, or news in return. Martha Stevenson of San Antonio made thousands of dollars this way between 1881 and 1889, even learning Apache to bargain fairly. Sometimes warnings came through that window, a message scratched in the dirt, a map sketched with a stick, or a whispered warning of hostile bands nearby. Hollywood loves to paint the frontier as endless conflict, but these windows tell another story. They were part market stall, part peace treaty, and part lifeline. Through those narrow slots passed not just goods, but trust, information, and the fragile possibility of cooperation in a brutal landscape. 4. The rifle rest window. Still photographs of authentic frontier houses show oddly wide window sills carved with neat half moons. They weren't decorative. Those grooves were rifle rests, sized for common barrels like the Winchester 1873 or a Springfield trap door. A settler could plant the forearm, settle the sights, and hold as steady as a fence post while anything on horseback closed the distance. The sills tilted a hair downward, perfect for shots at riders or anyone crawling. Close. At the Garrett homestead near El Paso, each window bore a different groove, cut to the height and reach of its owner. Even 12-year-old Billy Garrett had a youth rifle notch he could find in the dark. Windows became embrasures, and the living room a redoubt. It's telling that families invested their limited time in carpentry, not for ornament, but for accuracy. One neat groove per loved one, a quiet promise that if danger came, they'd meet it together. Vamp the false floor cache. Under the creak of floorboards lay a second house, one made of tin boxes, waxed cloth, and careful inventory. False floors hid caches arranged by purpose, food and medicine under the kitchen, weapons beneath the bedroom, gold under the parlor for bargaining or flight. Sarah McKinney, a widow near Fort Worth, kept 7 such hides and made her children practice finding them blindfolded. Each cache opened by count, not sight, 3 steps from the hearth. Lift the split board, slide the tin, reseal, and leave no sign. Ammunition sat wrapped against moisture, water jugs corked and replaced, a spare dress rolled tight and tied with cord. Frontier life trained a paranoia that was really prudence. If outlaws found one stash, they'd assume more. So boards went. Back flush, dust smoothed with a broom, and a family's real wealth vanished back into the skeleton of the house. 6. The chimney shooting platform. The chimney was more than a throat for smoke. Iron rungs set inside the firebox led to a cramped perch just below the roof line, where a defender could see the approach of riders before hoofbeats shook the yard. Small ports bored through brick let a rifle barrel breathe and speak. Hooks on the wall held a canteen and cartridge pouch. Smoke became a signal system, white for traitors, black for hostiles, an urgent column for neighbors to grab their children and run. The Thompson family near Amarillo built 3 tiers, each a one-person station with a rope ladder to spill onto the roof if needed. It was a medieval idea recast in red clay, turned the highest point of the home into a watchtower. If someone clambered up the chimney with a rifle, you didn't ask questions. You doused the lamps, gathered the little ones, and listened. 7. The trapdoor kitchen. The brightest room was the most vulnerable. Firelight marked the kitchen from miles away, and cooking smells carried like gossip on a dry wind. So many kitchens hid a door in the floor, sometimes under a heavy table on greased skids one person could shove aside, sometimes beneath boards that lifted on a rope and counterweight. A practiced family could vanish in seconds, the door slamming shut on its own. The smartest designs opened into tunnels, kitchen to root cellar, onto the barn, a jog to the outhouse, then a narrow crawl to the neighbor's fence line. Children learned the route like a catechism. Lanterns were kept trimmed. Boots and blankets stashed below. When trouble knocked, the house could appear empty in the time it took a robber to kick the latch. The meal might go cold, but the family would live to eat it tomorrow. 8. The window weight weapons. Sash windows rose and fell on counterweights hidden in voids. Frontier families stared at those iron bars and saw potential. Some filed edges into crude clubs, others tied chains to make flails. The inventive swapped. Held the weights entirely. Thomas Morrison near Kansas City fixed loaded revolvers to a window's counterweight mechanism. Pull the wrong sash and find yourself staring at a Colt muzzle you just summoned. Most households settled for a simpler, trip a latch and drop 20 pounds of iron into the forearms of anyone coming through glass. The beauty of the contraptions was that they hid in plain sight. A thief might plan for locks and bolts, few planned for gravity. In a world where lumber was dear and iron dearer, no piece of metal remained single purpose. Even a window learned to fight back. 9. The double wall secret room. From the road, it looked like a one-room cabin. Inside, the proportions were off. A 3-foot thickness between walls concealed a long secret chamber with bedrolls, a chamber pot, shelves for food, and gun racks. Access hid behind a cupboard panel or a section of wainscot that popped free with a twist. The cleverest builds breathed disguised vents and even a sliver of window, massed outside by siding. The Reynolds family near Denver ducted the hidden hearth into the main chimney so no second smoke trail would betray them. Children turned sideways and shuffled the length of the house, learning not to bump the studs. During a raid, everyone vanished into the walls and waited, the house briefly becoming a hollow shell. People today talk about open concept. On the frontier, the concept was closed, tight, quiet, and the difference was life. 10. The suicide. Porch, a frontier porch, invited shade and conversation, and in a siege became a staging platform for anyone about to batter the door. So some families designed porches to give way. Support posts sat on sockets, wedges held, beams that could be knocked free with a mallet from an inside panel. Down came boards, bandits, and bravado, sometimes into pits dug shallow and spiked. In Tombstone, the Johnson place took it further, wiring the porch with dynamite to blow outward, buying seconds to flee. Grisly? Certainly, but families practiced. The drill as somberly as a fire brigade, mother to the mallet, father to the rifle, children to the trap door. You don't build a collapsing porch because you want to use it. You build it so the option exists when every other option is gone. 11. The weaponized well-a-well was life and a target. So settlers armored them with tricks. False bottoms 10 feet down, concealed dry shelves where rifles, cartridges, and bread wrapped in oilcloth waited. Handholds in the stone liner led to a tight tunnel back toward the house. The cover might be rigged to swing or drop, sending the unwary 30 feet into cold water. Iron spikes set in mortar discouraged climbing. The Patterson family near Abilene built a 3-level labyrinth and a rope system to flood the yard, turning clay to slick muck under horses. Poison was a frontier fear, so was theft by dehydration. A smart family transformed their well from vulnerability into trap, reserve, and escape hatch at once. To a thirsty raider peering in, it still looked like a hole in a bucket. That was the point. 12. The collapsible staircase 2-story homes offered height and hazard. Families pinned stair stringers with removable pegs and braced landings with bars that slid free. Pull the set and the whole flight clattered away, sealing family on the second floor while intruders milled below. Steps doubled as drawers, lift a tread and find a pistol, a pouch of cartridges, a coil of rope. The Hendersons near Dallas built theirs to reassemble from above with a pulley. Bridge first to a bedroom, window then lower into place when it was safe to descend. Children were told, if the stairs fall, do not climb. Fetch the rope and keep low. In a land with no building inspector but plenty of bad men, a staircase didn't just connect floors, it separated worlds, giving the upper rooms a final stubborn dignity, ours not yours. 13. The floor furnace. Trapsome houses warmed their bones with a floor furnace, a fire pit boxed below grade, covered by a heavy iron grate. At night, that grate could be unlatched by a line looped to a side table. To a candlelit intruder, boards. An iron looked the same until they didn't. A 6-foot fall into heat, and suddenly the hallway was clear again. Families placed those grates where boots would land. Front entry, pinch points between rooms. The mechanism wasn't elaborate, the calculation was. Fire was already there, the hole already dug. The frontier ethic was to make what you had serve, twice. In the daylight, the great bore foot traffic. After dark, it bore the weight of a sober promise. Our children will sleep through this night. 14. The bulletproof Bible. Corner in one corner, the family Bible sat on a stout stand, open to Psalms. The stand, however, was laminated wood and sheet metal, shaped to deflect a bullet. The Bible itself might be hollowed to cradle a pocket pistol. The angle from chair to doorway was perfect. A man could appear to read, then pivot and fire from behind piety. Some went further, sitting tiny gun ports behind scripture verses and carving thicker paneling to stop a shot. It wasn't blasphemy, it was a reconciliation of needs. Faith on the frontier walked with a rifle. If the door slammed in the room, filled with danger, a father could rise from prayer and fight, not because he loved violence, but because he loved the faces gathered on the other side of that stand. 15. The chamber pot. Bomb every home-owned ceramic chamber pots for the long nights of winter. Some became percussion grenades, a pot packed with gunpowder, nails, and scrap glass, fitted with a simple fuse, could be tossed from a window or dropped through a floor gap. Most households never used them, having them mattered. A widow near Tombstone wired 6 pots to a single pull, a last-ditch web of small blasts meant to shock and scatter. Outlaws searching for silver sometimes grabbed a pot for rummaging. Frontier. Irony at its sharpest. The idea wasn't elegance, it was surprise. A humble object, despised for its usual duty, reversed its meaning when everything else failed. You would rather never light that fuse, but it was there. 16. The escape tunnel. Bedbeds pushed tight to walls looked ordinary. Beneath some lay doors to tunnels braced with cut timber, vented by narrow shafts and aimed at safety, brushy gullies, a barn shadow, even a neighbor's fence line. The trick was speed. Roll, lift, drop, crawl. Children practiced with candles and then without, learning the scrape of knees, the feel of the first turn. Multiple exits let a family choose a direction the attackers didn't expect. A trigger. Behind them could collapse a section, a crude dead man's switch to deny pursuit. It wasn't grand engineering, it was competent survival, dug weekends at a time with a spade, a pry bar, and the ache of knowing you might one day need it. Frontier floors weren't just for walking, sometimes they were for disappearing. 17. The kitchen knife launcher. A row of knives above the stove seemed normal. In a few kitchens, the rack hid springs and a trigger wire. Pull, and steel leapt, one blade or a fan of them, across the room toward a doorway. Families that went this route often replaced cooking blades with purpose-made throwers, waited to fly straight. It sounds like melodrama until you remember the kitchen was where light and people clustered. The launcher wasn't the first line of defense. It bought seconds, shock, hesitation, a step backward, enough for children to slip through the trapdoor and for a parent to reach the rifle. Most never fired a blade in anger, but in that era, even the tools of supper rehearsed a darker role should the worst day arrive. 18. The poisoned doorknobs some settlers turned to chemistry. Oils extracted from local plants or mixed from household compounds were smeared thin on metal latches and knobs. Touch then rub an eye or lip, and the results were incapacitating, yet best. The danger, of course, was two-sided. Families marked the treated hardware with a nick only they recognized and scrubbed on a schedule. The tactic wasn't common, but it existed, another arrow in a quiver built under pressure. A frontier's ethic allowed for hard measures when nights were long and neighbors far. If a raider's hand burned or trembled before the latch turned, perhaps a child would have one more minute to reach the cellar. No one bragged about poison knobs. You used it if you must, and prayed you never must. 19. The collapsing roof defense roofs, like porches and stairs, could be made to fail in pieces. Removable props supported a section over a hallway or a parlor. A line run to the yard let a family yank supports from outside, dropping shingles, rafters, and dust in a choking curtain. Inside, attackers lost sight lines. Outside, defenders gained time. The idea wasn't to crush, but to confuse, to turn a house the intruders thought they'd conquered into a shifting maze. After the fall, the family took pre-planned routes: window to lean-to, lean-to to fence, fence to arroyo. Like so many frontier measures, it traded repair for survival. You could rebuild a section of roof with a neighbor's help. You could not rebuild a child. 20. The false wall gun, safe a plain wall papered with roses swung on hidden pivots to reveal the truth. A rack of rifles, boxes of shells, powder, shot, and cleaning kits, all arranged on shelves that hug the studs. Hinges concealed behind trim, a magnetic catch disguised as a nail head, and a chair set just so completed the illusion. Some even painted a fake window on the panel to match its twin. The purpose wasn't bravado, it was readiness without advertisement. A house bristling with visible arms invited theft. A quiet arsenal behind wallpaper armed a family without changing how their parlor looked to a passing preacher or a passing scout. If the latch clicked, the room transformed in a heartbeat. From Sunday calm to Monday siege. 21. The electrified fence, mechanical shock. Before wiring, ingenuity did the shocking. Perimeter rigs used springs, counterweights, and whip-like saplings to deliver a violent snap to hands that tugged the wrong cord or pushed the wrong rail. Think of it as kinetic electricity, stored energy released in a jolt that stung, bruised, and discouraged. Some gates hid barbs that popped when pressure shifted, others slammed a hinged arm into a thigh with surprising force. These contraptions were less about injury than deterrence. A curious trespasser yelped and reconsidered. A determined raider learned the fence bit back before he'd even reached the porch. In a place where law lagged behind need, families invented physics lessons that hurt, a crude but effective perimeter alarm you could build with a saw, rope, and nerve. 22. The swinging beam, trapped from the rafters, hung a timber that looked structural. In truth, it was balanced and latched, its mass held by a pin tied to a trip line or a pull ring. Triggered, the beam scythed down in an arc that no man could ignore, knocking legs from under or driving breath from lungs. Placement mattered: a choke point, a blind corner, a doorway beeline to the pantry. The release hid behind a shelf or in the next room. Resetting took 2 adults and a lever, which suited its purpose. It wasn't for games. Like many frontier devices, it turned the geometry of a room into a weapon. In a world of straight lines and simple tools, a swinging beam was as complex as it needed to be. 23. The quicksand floor. Some homesteads sat on loose, sandy soil near a creek. With shovels and a little earthwork, families cut shallow basins that could be flooded on short notice. What looked like parched ground turned to sucking mud that swallowed hoofs and stalled wagons. The idea wasn't to drown anyone, it was to immobilize the biggest advantage raiders had: speed and mass. Floodgates on a small dam or plugs yanked from diversion ditches did the trick. Afterward, the same ditches watered a truck patch or drained a sodden yard. Nature became an ally, and geography a weapon. To the untrained eye, nothing changed when the sun baked everything dry again. But the family knew. Under a thin crust of dust slept a trap they could wake with a bucket and a pry bar. 24. The mirror communication system. In a land measured in miles and minutes of light, neighbors talked with mirrors. A line of sight across pasture or ridge allowed brief flashes, 1, 2, long, short, prearranged patterns that said traitors, hostiles, help. Children learned to shield and angle the beam with a hat brim, to count beats under breath, to aim a glint like a thrown coin. Messages leapt farther than a shout and arrived faster than a rider could saddle. A woman alone could warn 3 households while barring her door. It was a frontier telegraph made of sun, tin, and practice. On some afternoons, you could stand with coffee and watch language flicker across the valley, silent as birds. When the bot signal ceased, you lit a lamp and checked the trap door. 25. The decoy house. The boldest defense was misdirection. A decoy cabin, thin-walled, poor-framed, baited with a few gaudy valuables, sat where a raider's eye naturally fell. The real home hid a little downslope among cottonwoods, or behind a knoll, reinforced and provisioned. A gang broke into the false prize and lost precious minutes to noise and pride. Meanwhile, the family watched from cover, weapons ready, routes planned. The decoy wasn't theater, it was timing. In those minutes, a neighbor might answer a mirror flash, a child could reach the root cellar, a father could take the first, and maybe only shot that mattered. When the raiders left, the loss was boards and trinkets, not blood. You could build another decoy. You could not replace a wife. 26. The booby-trapped rocking chair. Many porches a rocking chair creaked through summer evenings. In some homes it was wired to lash forward with a jerk of cord, knocking a man flat or tangling his legs exactly where defenders wanted him. A few chairs hid blades under the runner's nose, crude but persuasive. The trigger sat under a side table or behind the door jamb, where a hand could tug without being seen. As with the collapsing porch, the point wasn't sadism, it was margin. If a stranger stood too close to the threshold, a snap of wicker and pine-bought heartbeats for the trapdoor or the rifle rest. It's the same frontier habit repeated, take the ordinary and teach it a second job. Even a lullaby chair learned to kick. 27. The spiked floorboards, a run of planks near the entry, was slightly thicker and slightly springy. Inside was a grid of spikes that rose when a latch flipped, turning polished boards into a hedgehog. By daylight, the section locked safely flat. After dark, it armed with a quiet click. Families marked the safe path for bare feet. 2 boards off the wall, step the knots, not with paint but memory. The trap didn't need to maim, it needed to stop momentum, to force attention back to the doorway where defenders controlled the angles. Resetting required gloves and care, done in lamplight with the kind of patience frontier nights demanded. To a visitor, the floor was floor. To the family, it was a decision they could make in a breath. 28. The boiling kettle, trap above the stove. A hook-on chain held a black kettle that never quite cooled in winter. Some households rigged a quick release at the jam. Pull, and the chain swung, tipping scalding water, or in harder places, hot lard onto anyone rushing the kitchen. It wasn't subtle, and no one took pride in it. But the kitchen was where babies slept in baskets and bread rose under cloth. The trap was there because this room mattered. After use, windows opened, steam vented, and a floor scrubbed before. Don told no tale. If the release never needed pulling, it still taught the same lesson as every other device in these homes. Preparedness is an act of love, ugly sometimes, but honest. 29. The hidden spike. Ladders to lofts or granaries were narrow, with rungs you could grab in the dark. A few were built with hinged spikes tucked behind the rungs. Pull a pin and the back of the ladder transformed into a bed of points. Try to force your way up and meet a forest you hadn't planned for. Other versions folded inward and locked, pinning a climber's shins and making him an immobile target for a command to leave, or worse if he didn't. The pins tied to cords. The cords ran where only the family knew, like the collapsible staircase. The ladder could switch allegiance, your ladder, not theirs, in a second. Afterward, it went back to carrying sacks of grain and sleepy children. 30. The animal alarm system. Not every defense used metal or carpentry. Some families bred vigilance. Geese honked at silhouettes before a dog even scented them. Hounds gave voice at a fence line long before a knuckle rapped would. Pigs, clever and fearless, would rush and bite ankles, turning a bold stride into a stumble. Pens and runs were arranged so disturbances traveled like a wave toward the house, one species waking the next. Children learned each call, the bored bark, the curious cluck the true alarm. In a world without sirens, animals were sensors. Their senses the first line of warning on moonless nights. When the yard erupted, lamps stayed dark, the trapdoor lifted, and the family counted heads. If the clamor passed and the stars settled, everyone breathed again and fed the geese a little extra in the morning.